Hello and good afternoon. I hope everybody had a good breakfast. My name is Johnen. I am double bass player and managing director of the German Jazzunion based in Berlin. And I am very honored to welcome you to our panel, Jazz Musicians All Over Europe Unite, hosted by a very young and exciting network of jazz musicians associations from 14 European countries. Our new network has the working title Voice of Jazz Musicians in Europe, and can be seen as a positive result of the Corona crisis. We started with the beginning of the pandemic in May 2020, and since then we met monthly in online conferences, focusing on exchange of knowledge, information and experience, and best and worst practice examples concerning the way how our governments are managing the crisis, which put many of us in a very bad situation. For that, we launched an international survey which will be presented and discussed today. So today we want to show what we have learned until now, and we are here to learn more about European politics and maybe as well something about the future of Voice of Musicians in Europe. Let me pass the word to Fleurine, who will present our panel guests.
Hi, my name is Fleurine, and I'm a jazz vocalist, composer and lyricist, and I'm also a board member of the BIM, which is the Dutch Union for Jazz and Improvised Music. And we're presenting this survey, and we're also seeing that like Johan Cruyff, the Dutch soccer player, used to say, every disadvantage has an advantage, because through COVID, which brought us a lot of bad stuff, we also had this unique opportunity to connect with all these other unions and share our experiences. We're also very honored to have two special guests who will listen to the results of our survey. They are Barbara Gessler, the head of the unit Creative Europe of the European Commission. Welcome, Barbara. And Romeo Franz, he's a member of European Parliament and the vice chair of the Committee of Culture and Education. Welcome, Romeo. And I also am proud to present Pedro Cravinho. He's the head of the Portuguese Jazz Network, and he will present the results of our survey. Pedro.
Hello, thank you, Fleurine. Hello, everybody. My name is Pedro Cravinho. To clarify, I'm a co-founder of the Portuguese Jazz Network and also a board member. The head of our Portuguese Jazz Network is our colleague, Carlos Martins. But I'm also a senior research fellow at Birmingham Center for Media and Cultural Research and at Birmingham City University. So just a few notes about myself. I've been involved in the jazz world, if you want, over the last 3.5 decades, first as a musician, then as an educator, and now as a full-time researcher. So it has been, how do you say, extraordinary experience to be part of this project, and also an honor to be part of this panel. I will follow the slides, but I will ask Fleurine to comment on our first slide. If I can find the mouse, yes.
Yes, so we had a wonderful participation of 23 countries. The countries that that answered in the highest numbers were Germany, who rolled out the survey, of course, Spain, Italy, the Netherlands, and Portugal. Out of this, 12 unions are really talking, but we're hoping that unions and associations and jazz members of other countries will also join us down the line.
So I would like also to contextualize the participants that took part on the survey. As Fleurine mentioned, We're talking about 1,500 participants from 23 countries. And from those, we have 80% of male, 19.6 percentage of female, and very small percentage of no identified. It is vital, in my opinion, to highlight these figures because there is still a lot of work to do in terms of gender balance in a still male-dominated jazz world across Europe. Another aspect to highlight is the age of our participants. Most of the professional jazz musicians that took part on our survey have between 25 and 54 years old, as you can see, split into two different age groups, as you can identify here with green color. And there's still many professional jazz musicians are active with more than 50 years old. On the other hand, a small number of professional musicians across Europe between 18 and 24 years old. And the reason I'm lighting this later is that there is still also a lot of work to do in terms of sustainability, not only support the older generation, but also those who want to start their professional careers in jazz, working in Europe. Now,
yes, I also think that the 5% of that young age group most of them are students, and our survey was for professional musicians under the influence of COVID. So the young group is probably, a lot of them are still at the conservatory.
Yes, and that's why it's important for us to prepare them to the future. So as professionals, what they can expect from Europe in terms of working professionally as a jazz musician. Urs?
Yeah, I can confirm that sustainability is one of the most actual purpose we all have to fight for. And we can see here in that slide that most of our participants are performing musicians. 73% define themselves as performing musicians, performing artists, and 24% are teaching. There are 3% who define themselves as other, that may be copyrights, merchandise, composition, sponsoring, and other working purposes you have to do as well as a jazz musician. That's the employment status of the performing artists, and we asked our participants. Can anyone help me? Is participants? Participants, yeah. Okay, thank you very much. The 72% of the participants are freelance musicians, and 16% we have as employed musicians. If I can talk about the situation in Germany, there are very few possibilities to have a steady employment as a jazz musician. There are some radio orchestras, but most of the colleagues are freelance musicians, and that's shown here in that slide. That is a situation all over Europe. We have a special situation in France, Belgium, and Luxembourg, where we have a special status called intermittent du spectacle, and we have 6% of other undefined employment status.
Fleurine?
Yes, here again you see that 84% of our participants are full-time musicians, 12% are part-time, and 4%, I don't know what they are, but other. I think the part-time musicians are, they're people who have a second job on the side. It's not that many. So most people who filled out this survey are full-time musicians. And this is a very important one, their impact on creative work during the pandemic. Kind of devastating. 58% says that it's worse. 19% says nothing has changed, and 23% says it is better. I personally belong to the 58% that thinks it's worse. It's really hard. I found it really hard to be creative when you have nothing to look forward to, when there's no performances scheduled. Now that has been the case for 14 months almost. So 19% says nothing has changed. I'm suspecting that 19% correlates to the people that are also teachers. 23% says it's better. Well, of course, if you're not touring, then you might have more time to create. How has it been for you, Urs? Were you able to compose more, or?
I had the chance to launch some productions I couldn't have launched without that special situation, and we started to work more remotely with colleagues all over planet Earth. What wasn't actually in my working reality until now. So something better, but globally, I think I confirm totally that it got worse, and it's getting worse every day, because you need to play with people, you need to play for people, you need your audience, and you need the feeling to be on stage. That's you feel every day that the hunger and the thirst gets bigger to get on stage as soon as possible.
Okay, so regarding the impact on personal life of our participants, as we can see, there is a large percentage which was strongly affected. For 19%, nothing has changed, and I would say probably the same group of those from the previous slide that as Fleurine highlighted. And then we have 7% that say their personal life was better, so which is quite interesting to understand. But what I would like us to think about is this large percentage, the 74%. Rules?
We asked as well about the professional situation, and we can see compared to the situation in 2019, the same in 2018, what we can see here, that the performances, the number of performances is slightly to zero for most of the musicians we asked or who answered our survey. So we can see that 91% played less than 20 performances or none in 2020, whilst 55% played 21 to 60 performances in 2019, and more than 60 performances was a number that 23% played in 2019. So it's a big difference, and you can understand really good that the situation is completely different, and you feel the lockdown and you see them that come on their child.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, this is super self-explanatory. For 86%, yeah, it has been really worse, the impact on the economic situation. And it's like Urs said, getting worse every day. Like a year ago, people who were like renting a place to practice could still afford it, but now they can't anymore. 9% says nothing has changed. I think that always applies to the musicians with a steady teaching job at a conservatory. They can still maintain their economic situation. And the 5% that's better, I want to meet those people. I want to know how they did it, but we're concentrating on the 86%. Next slide, please.
So I think it's also important for us to highlight those figures here and what the jazz musicians or professional ones expect for their future. So during the 2020, because of a pandemic, 50% of the participants had to change their job completely, which is concerning. 23 had to find a supplement to survive. And then in 2021, there is a large percentage. They are expecting to change their jobs, giving up the professional activity as jazz musicians. Lastly, and probably dramatically, only 38% of participants are sure that will continue their working professional activity as jazz musicians, which is very, very dramatic, in my opinion, and our opinion as a collective.
Yeah, and we can see the receiving of financial aid from government. 56% of the participants actually receive financial aid, and 44% didn't. So maybe we should as well have a closer look and how is the situation in the respective countries. And maybe today we are here as well to ask what can the European level and politics say and answer and maybe help on that purpose.
In fact, I think that's an important issue. And lastly, and just this is our last slide before we finish our presentation and we start our discussion with guests, say that 96% of all participants in the survey, covering, as I mentioned, 23 countries across Europe, believe that it is essential to have a voice or a united voice of jazz musicians in Europe in order to improve their working conditions. So I leave this slide as a trigger probably for our debate. Thank you for those who are listening, and probably we can now involve our guests. Fleurine, you want to take the lead here?
Yes, I would like to give the word to Barbara Gessler. She is the head of the unit of Creative Europe, and they have this wonderful initiative called Music Moves Europe. Barbara, would you like to tell us something about that? And I would love to not see the slide anymore. Can we see the people in the screen?
Yes.
Yes, hello everyone. Happy Labor Day. Although is it really happy after this presentation? I'm not so sure. As head of unit of Creative Europe, I'm responsible for a funding program which is called Creative Europe, and maybe some of you are aware of it. Some of you have maybe hopefully already participated in projects that we support. And Creative Europe is the only solely directed to the culture and creative sector funding instrument at the European level. And indeed, Fleurine, thank you for mentioning Music Moves Europe. Music Moves Europe is an initiative that the European Commission launched a couple of years ago. And in a nutshell, because we don't have so much time, Music Moves Europe is a kind of variety of instruments, funding via Creative Europe, for example. Creative Europe funds in particular what we consider our European added value, which is mainly also cross-border and transnational cooperation, of course, because we are there to complement what is done at other levels, meaning at local, regional, or national level. But we also support networking and platforms. And for example, platforms in the area of music can be very interesting because they aim at giving, in particular, also emerging artists a platform and the possibility to reach audiences in other countries. So there's this funding element, a horizontal element in Creative Europe. And lately we have also introduced with the new program that will come into being, we will hear probably more from the Member of Parliament about this next month, that we have also introduced a sectorial approach that aims at targeted funding to the music area. So that's a kind of funding support under Creative Europe, but there are also other possibilities which we follow up very closely. Then there, of course, there's a very strong dialogue element in Music Moves Europe. Music Moves Europe also consists in the fact that we are, since a couple of years, really heavily engaging in a dialogue with the sector. And this is my first remark also that I wanted to convey to you. I think getting together, and in every crisis, there's also an opportunity, as you have nicely said, getting together and speaking with one voice at the European level is certainly something that is very much appreciated and very useful and very meaningful. Of course, we talk with our networks that we also know, for example, the European Music Council and other representatives in the music area. And of course, we have contact also with other people in the sector and in the industry. But I think to learn from the crisis that together as Europeans, you have a stronger voice if you bundle your concerns and you bundle also your questions and receiving answers, that's always an extremely good move. But I would go even further. I would say speaking with one voice as the music sector is already a challenge. So not trying to go too much into the different departments, even though I'm very much aware that jazz is a very special case. But as a general remark, I think voices are always stronger when they are encompassing an entire sector. And last but not least, next to this dialogue, we have issued a couple of studies also that are important for the sector and a couple of special calls. And one of them that we launched last year also aims at checking the possibilities and supporting projects that are now linked to the new digital environment. And next to that, or ensuing to that, we also have, of course, the legal aspect of Music Moves Europe, which is very much related to copyright and other legislative issues that I know are also of very important relevance to your sector. So you can see Music Moves Europe consists of many elements. But as a general last introductory remark, let me just say that we are very much aware at the European Commission. We saw from the start, or shall I say at the European level, let's not talk about institutions. I think we're in the same boat here with the Parliament as well, that in particular the music sector and other performing arts have been particularly hardly hit by the crisis and the impact that this has on your economic situation. We are very much aware of this. And there are other funding instruments that will also help, hopefully, the music sector, but I would like to leave it at that at the moment.
Thank you so much. Yeah, we are worried because we see a tremendous amount of support coming for the cultural sector. But what we actually have deduced from this survey is that very little of that money actually ends up in the hands of the musicians, especially the freelance musicians. And jazz musicians, as you've seen, are mostly freelance musicians. So if you see, if you see Europe and the money that is given to the arts as a big, Belgian French fry point, then the mayonnaise drips and it gives all the institutions money, but only in the very bottom of this French fry bag are the musicians, and they get the drips and the drabs, and some get nothing. So we are really trying to look for solutions for the freelance musicians in particular, which is most of the jazz musicians. So
Yes, Fleurine, I'm absolutely aware of this, and we have heard really from the beginning. I'm sure Romeo will also confirm this. We have heard of the concerns of in particular also the self-employed and those that are not employed by an institution or not employed, as you said, by orchestras, etc., which is the minority of people, as your survey also shows. We have been made aware of this. I'm personally convinced, I must say, that we must make sure that the funding reaches the artists. But in my case, for example, Creative Europe, we are making sure, of course, that in the projects that we support, because we don't have the means at the European level to give individual funding to artists. That's very certain, because we're tackling with the whole of Europe and beyond. But by supporting institutions and projects, there is, of course, a direct support also to the artists that work in these projects. So we have to really make a difference between what should be done at which level. The European level is certainly not the level closest to each individual artist, but via what we are there for, which is the European added value, we can make sure that you can continue touring, that you can continue engaging in cross-border projects, in networking like you are doing today. This is the kind of added value that we can give, and I'm sure Romeo will confirm this. We are also, of course, in contact with the member states that are now launching their recovery plans for which Europe funds them, and that they make sure that they also support the artists. So that is also something that we're doing as a kind of mainstreaming political work.
Yeah, that's great to hear. But it's the reality has been, at least in the past year, that people that work for cultural institutions that have a steady job, whether it be promoting the venue or selling tickets, will keep their salaries, and the musicians who fill up the venues, they get nothing. Like, for instance, all the musicians that have not played in the past 14 months, almost none of us have gotten paid. Like, our payments has been postponed. Our concert have been postponed. We've not received money. So that's a very, it's a interesting twist. I'm also interested to hear what Romeo has to say about this.
Hello, Fleurine. Thank you very much. Your survey shows that the cultural and creative industries have suffered most from the COVID-19 restrictions and measures in all European countries. And the economic impact is enormous, and the consequences for employees are catastrophic. And I think it's clear the situation is dramatic for those involved in culture and artists, musicians and actors and all them. And I'm a musician myself, and I know the fears and worries of these people who live from their art, their music. Those who often work in precarious jobs, most of whom are self-employed, with no regular income and little access to welfare systems, especially for those in atypical employments. Myself, my son, you have seen him, he played a guitar and he's 20 years old. In 2020, he lost 40 gigs. 40 gigs. And for the 2021 now, we lost again 50 gigs. Because, you know, when we make the acquis for our jobs, I must do it now for 22 and for 23. I must do it now. And for 22, we have no jobs for our concert. Because that means 3 years, no money, nothing to eat, nothing to drink. And he can be happy that he have a daddy who is a MEP. So, but
member of the European Parliament.
I'm working in Parliament
for jazz musicians.
Yeah. And for him, it's a very bad situation. And then I will what we can do. Art. I think it's important to say this. Art and culture are relevant to the system. I must mention it again. Art and culture are relevant to the system. We have to fight for this recognition, and we have to try that this fact is also accepted in the political institutions, and it's adequately supported. That's one of the biggest problem. And if not now, then when? So, and we have to find supporters in these institutions who help us to bring art and culture much more into focus. Access to the EU programs must be made as easy as possible for the artists. The bureaucratic task is often not manageable for many of our friends. How can our freelancers participate in the programs? Theory and practice often suffer from one another. First of all, it is the tasks of the member states to do their cultural work. And that's one of the misunderstandings that the EU, we can do it and so, but we have one word here, and that's subsidiarity. You know, we must bring the national states are they must do it first, and we can give a recommendation, but the national states must do the first step. And maybe I can mention that what is happening at the EU level, the cultural and creative sector must be explicitly taken into account in the programs for reconstruction or economic revitalization. The member states, including Germany, must invest at least 2% of the funds in their national development plans for the cultural and creative sectors. But more needs to be done to save Europe's culture's ecosystems. Culture has not only an economic value, but also a value as an expression of humanity. It strengthens the development of inclusive societies. And I know from what I speak, maybe I'm a part of a national minority. I'm a German Sinto. And when I make my concerts, I speak much about anti-racism. So, and that's a platform what I need to make anti-racism training in my concerts. And when you speak about jazz, jazz is this form of music who is developed from racism. That's one of and that's the thing, how important is culture, how important is our art, and how important is jazz. And I tell it because for too many people is music nice to have. But now in this situation, COVID-19, our people, your survey shows the dramatic situation. And now, nice to have. That's only, and that I mentioned before. To recognize, this is the way what I fight for, to recognize that art and culture is system relevant. They will see it in 1-2 years later when we don't do something against this situation, when we lose our culture and our art and our music and our musicians and our concerts.
Thank you so much.
Last year I had one concert in the pandemic. There was a time in Germany, it was a small time when the lockdown was open, and we have a concert in a German city called Wolfenbüttel. And the people comes after 3 or 4 months to hear the first time music. That was a feeling I cannot tell you. That was the first time when I feel how important is this to come together. All the online concert, what I have do, it's nice to do it, but the effect from a live concert to come together with my audience, to speak with them, that can never be, you can never have with the online.
And compare that. Yeah. Thank you, Romeo. It's really great to know that we have one of us in the European Parliament. And there's a lot of what you said is what we are talking about in our conferences. Maybe we could start with some questions we have collected from our network, and maybe someone wants to put his questions in the Slido tool in the chat, and we can collect it. I would like to start. We tried to analyze the situation concerning the corona crisis in the respective countries in Europe, but it's so hard to compare the measures because the situation is so different in the European countries. The way the cultural infrastructure is financed by the states, the subventions are so different. And in the effect, you can't compare the situation in the corona crisis because it's the basis is so different. So from a European point of view, we heard from Barbara that there are funding instruments that try to help that musicians can continue their work. But how powerful is the European politic today to regulate some things that can help to have a more equal situation in the countries of Europe? Maybe I can put that question again to Romeo and afterwards to Barbara.
Barbara mentioned this in the chat. We have some money to help, and we have programs. That's clear. That is what we can do. And I don't speak now in this moment, not from Germany, what we must to do, but there's money there. But I think on what we must work. And that I tell you as from my own experience as a musician, it's really difficult as a freelancer, as a musician. You know, I want to do music and not bureaucratic. We are musicians, to have the access to these programs, to this money. And there's the most of us has this problem. When I speak with my friends who are musicians, they say to me, Romeo, that's great what you do in the European Union and the EU in Brussels, but you know, it's really hard to participate on these funds. And that I think that must be our task, Barbara, too, to see now in this urgent situation, what we have now, it's really an urgent situation for us, that the access to our programs must be much easier to available for all of our people who are not only, who has not this capacities to make a big Antrag or proposal, is that right in Germany? In German, in English?
Application.
Application, danke Barbara. The application. And I think that we must see that the access must be much easier, so easy how it's possible for our people, for our musicians and artists. I think that's what we can really do. We have the money there, but often is the access to this money for freelancer, for I say it so, for our little musicians, it's not possible.
I think an important thing to mention also is for all the musicians listening, if you're not part of a union, please do become a part of a union, because we as jazz unions are also speaking on your behalf. So we could help. So anybody who's listening who hasn't signed up with his union in his country, please do sign up, because together we are stronger and we can talk to Romeo and Barbara and, you know, make the access easier.
I have also a comment/question. I understand. Thank you both comments, and I really agree with most of everything that's been talked here. I understand the complexity that involves financial support to this sector, either at European or national level, in order to reach the individual, as we are being describing. So I'm having more kind of a proactive or approach to say, probably to those involved in those decision makings, how can we help? So
yeah, how can we get, how could we as a voice for European jazz musicians get closer to Brussels? How could we, for our particular, we're talking about jazz, I know Barbara likes to put it in a broader context, but we are a marginalized group and we really want to be visible and be heard. So do you have any advice, Barbara, on how we could do that?
Well, first of all, as I said, thanks, Fleurine. I've been listening and I've been typing away. You could see that because I didn't want to interrupt anyone. But I would like I would like you to see that we are very much aware, as Romeo also put it, but there are limits to what we can do in forms of direct support to individual artists. I think that's very clear. Today, via legislation, I think via copyright issues, fair remuneration of artists, there is something that we can do. We are also launching a study at the moment on we have a study on the working conditions of artists and the social conditions of artists. I can surely send a link to you, Fleurine, and then you can also distribute it to your members. I think that's something that I wanted to mention, that you are aware that we are looking into this. And of course, we are in contact with our other DGs, we call them Directorates General. You can imagine these are like the other ministries, for example, those that are responsible for employment, those that are responsible for digitization, those that are responsible for regional support, all of those. And we are talking to them and trying to alert about the situation of the creative sector and of the cultural sector, and of course also of the artists. As I said, we support networks, we support the Europe Jazz Network, you know that. So there is a strong voice for jazz. I know maybe it's not only you, but it's if you can also, liaise with those networks that are very strong and very professional, and also very good at making your voices heard, because this is also what they do. I'm aware they are also they are another element in the value chain, but they make the voice of jazz heard in Europe, and I think that's very important that you also have a strong link with them.
And we are strongly connected to them, and we already have that link.
Yes.
I'm just wanting to mention that we have 5 minutes left, and there's so much things that we would like to discuss. I'm going to just highlight a few points. I also want to look past COVID. Of course, we're all like, this is super crisis. But I think as Europe, and the reason why we united as jazz unions and associations is there's much work to do within Europe. We could look at how we could support each other and be more green and sustainable in touring and having more connection within European countries, because there's been a big emphasis always on, of course, the United States, because that's where jazz initiated, and also the UK. They have a very strong part in the European jazz, which is beautiful, but there could also be more balance, I think, throughout European countries. Do you have anything to say about that?
Just before we finish, we also have a few questions from people on the audience.
Oh, that's even better.
I could, if you don't mind, would you like me to share with so we have comments or questions. Some Chelsea McBride from Canada. So it says, do most countries on your survey already have musicians unions? They have support freelancers in any way? So probably this is for us. And then someone question, is there any plans to encourage European funded festivals, venues and producers to book European artists rather than overseas artists? So it's about and the last one from Gabriele Di Franco, are you considering lobbying a special status for musicians? So I think this probably, there's a lot of topics addressed here. So I don't know if any of you would like to make any comments regarding those questions, comments.
Well, the first one is very easy to answer. We have 12 organizations that are in Europe sort of organized as unions or associations. They're in Scandinavia, Denmark, Sweden, Norway, and Finland, and then Netherlands, Germany, France, Switzerland, Austria, Portugal, Spain, and Italy. Those are the countries that have a specific organization that gears towards jazz. We welcome all other countries as well to join us, even if they don't have professional organizations yet. We've been talking to Greece, we've been talking to countries with smaller organizations, but that's the first question that I can answer. Maybe Urs, you could take the second one.
Just one addition, the focus is as well towards the Eastern European countries, where we have still only few contacts. And that's, I think, a really a big focus for us to be a common voice for the jazz musicians all over Europe. And that includes, of course, the Eastern European countries. So
Yes.
maybe I got the message that now we have to close, because I think in 1 minute we will end that panel for today. And I think we should thank a lot to our guests we had today. Thank you, Barbara Gessler. Thank you, Romeo Franz. It was a pleasure to have you here, and a really great step for us to learn from you about our next steps. And maybe we can talk a little bit more afterwards and clarify some questions from the panel guests and from the participants, or from the audience. Maybe Fleurine, Pedro, you want to have the last words?
I just want, as you, to thank our guests and their time to be here, and also to consider this as a starting point for something. I understand there are some connections, but probably we should see the particularities of the music sector and not take it everything as a whole, because when you talk about classical music, it's very different from the jazz world. So there are some particularities.
Really want to say, European musicians, if you're listening, please unite. Please make together we're stronger. Become a part of your union, and let's make jazz, the jazz voice heard all over Europe and beyond.
Thank you.